Royalty. Royalty.
So today we're going to talk about what you should know before you get married. And for some people, it'll be what you probably wish you would have known before you got married. And so the launching pad for what we're going to kind of discuss, and there's obviously going to be Torah references in there. So I don't ever want to be the person that launches from the New Testament like this is where the concept comes from, because it's not, that wouldn't be accurate. So we're going to deal with this whole idea of being married and being single and what each of those things entails. And so the place we're going to use is 1 Corinthians chapter 7. And the reason why we're using that, and we're using Paul, and so let me clear up a little contention about Paul. Paul is a lawyer. It's very important. He is a student of the law and a lawyer. So one of the interesting things about lawyers is that what they do is they interpret, right, the scripture or the law in the context in order to fit certain situations. It's actually what prophets did, but we don't call them lawyers, we call them prophets. It's revealing the seed, or revealing that which is within, revealing the word to fit a person's personal situation. So the reason why people have an issue with Paul is because your understanding of the law might not be as deep as his. And it's very interesting because the New Testament does a very poor job of cross-referencing the things that Paul talks about with the stuff that's with Torah. Paul's not coming up with something and he's not taking liberties. And anytime that he says something and he says, okay, this is not scripture, as a lawyer, this is a person saying, I'm looking at the intent of the law and applying it to the situation I'm speaking of. So I hope that kind of clears up some things, because a lot of people either throw out the baby with the bathwater or only rely on those particular things and not being able to find the things that may be an interpretation of something in Torah and then totally negating them, or going all the way with them and not seeing that they apply to a certain situation and not necessarily that whole portion of the law can apply to that congregation. What Christianity does a very poor job of is that the reason why the people who have been in church look at Paul in probably a negative way is because when a person in church looks at something in the Bible and applies it, they go, this is how it feels to me. And it will have no contextual basis with scripture. It might be completely lawless, but because that's how I feel, that's how I interpret it. We have to stop applying what we experience in Christianity to a group of people who were not Christians. Paul was not a Christian, okay, by what we now understand a Christian is. Paul was a Torah believer who was explaining these concepts that he had grown up with his whole life and had given his life study to people who had no textual basis or living experience for those particular things. Okay, in saying that, when we are now in captivity, for some people, it's hard to just look at Torah and say, okay, I see how this applies to me. And so I think the blessing of the Brit Kadashah and a person like Paul is to explain some of these concepts to you through a lens that would be more palatable, okay? Because if you just read through Torah and pull out the verses where we're going to get ready to talk about, you're not going to really understand it, because a lot of people have not began to actually live the life of Torah and to apply the principles in a way to see how they actually work. Okay, that was a totally long introduction, but I felt like it was necessary. Okay, so we're going to look at 1 Corinthians chapter 7. Okay, so what we're dealing with in 1 Corinthians chapter 7 is this idea of, obviously dealing with a group of people, a set-apart assembly, is this idea of marriage. And one of the interesting things I'm seeing right now is that pretty much the teaching is that every person has to have a husband or every person has to have a wife. And that has never been the actual teaching of the scriptures, because that would mean that everybody was called to the same purpose or had the same gifts, and that's also not true. There are different tribes, and those tribes operate in ways and have certain gifts, and they add those to the assembly, and then in the family you have people with certain gifts. And so to make every woman feel like she has to have a husband is not consistent. I would say that. But at the same time, It takes a very, very special individual, and we'll see this as we go through this, to remain single, because you don't get to be single and be a hoe. You don't get to be single and be a harlot. You don't get to be single and be like, oops, I keep slipping up and screwing people. Then you're not called to singleness. You're called to be married. That's very easy. If you are single and you're sleeping with a bunch of men, then you're not called to singleness. You need to find your own husband, and then all the men who are sleeping around with women, you need to find your own wife. It's very cut and dry, because this idea of burning, it means you're burning with desire. If you watch that video that I put up, Fire and Desire, you'll see this idea of this fire and this desire. You have the desire to be with someone. You just haven't found your person. But finding the person according to Torah is not done by just merely sleeping with people to figure out if that person actually fits for you. Okay, that's not how we find mates in Torah. We don't find mates based upon our loins, our lower gate. We find gates based upon those who are on the same frequency with this area, with the heart and with the mind of Yah. Okay, so we don't find mates just by thinking with our lower gate. Okay, and so if you are called though to singleness, it means that you are content with being single. One of the weird things that's happened in our culture is that those people who, and there's always a label for it, but those people who are asexual, meaning those people who do not necessarily have a desire to be in a relationship. They love people, but they don't have a sexual desire toward the opposite sex, okay? And so what our society has done is claim that those people are homosexual. The fact that you don't have a desire toward the opposite sex means that you are homosexual, which is not necessarily the case. And so what you do is you're trying to categorize people based upon your comfortability. There are people who are asexual. There are women like that, and there are men like that. And I believe those people are called to a very special calling. And Paul talks about that calling, and that calling is the calling of singleness. And it means that you are not divided. I'm a wife and a mother, and I am always divided. My devotion to Yah is now filtered through my care of my husband and my children, and also the obedience I have to Yah and what he asks me to do. So I'm divided. There are times when I have to study, but as a wife and a mother, those things have to come first. So I have to make arrangements and figure out, okay, babe, can you take the kids from 12 to 2? I'm going to actually be writing in that window, and I kind of just need to meditate and get ready so that I can write. I have to make arrangements. A single person who has the same calling, right? They don't have to do that. When Yah tells them to do something, they do it. They don't have to go and make arrangements and find a sitter when them and their husband have to travel. That's not the case. The single person is able to serve Yah freely and without a divided attention. And so that is probably the greatest blessing that comes with, I think, singleness, is the fact that your attention is not diverted away from the Father in any way. Okay, so if Yah says, I need you to get on a plane and minister in Africa, you don't have to be like, okay, well, I got to be back because I can't be away for a whole month with my kids and they're gonna miss me. You don't have those kind of issues that come up for you. I mean, you might have obligations, but you kind of get my point. In the case of the married person, okay, he talks about the idea of being married. And so as you can see in here, Yah, when he's speaking through Paul, there's some things that he speaks about that we know Torah obviously has law for. But we're talking to a congregation. We're not talking to unbelievers. Unbelievers get divorced and they leave each other and they do these things at will. And there's supposed to be a difference within the called out assembly when it comes to divorce and separation and putting away. And if you read through the whole chapter, you understand that Paul's talking about a lot of order and the order of things and how things are supposed to function. And so for a person to know that they represent the Hamashiach and they represent Yah and his word and his Torah, then to live contrary to that then creates almost a disdain for the word for people who don't live the word. So if my relationship cannot make it and I'm in Torah, right, then what hope does a person have for their relationship and they're not in Torah. If my marriage can't work and we're both in Torah, then what kind of hope does a person who's in Torah and they're praying and pleading for their husband, how is that going to help them? And so for me, that is like a personal conviction that I have, because all relationships get rough. I'm just going to be honest. Like, I know there are people out here and they're like, oh my gosh, look at these people and I want to be just like this and I want to be just like that. And you're watching these couples and there's other couples online and they have good relationships. But people forget that people also have to work through things. To be one is to always be attacked with being separate. That is the attack of the adversary, because if you have a picture of a relationship that's functioning, and the only way to destroy the community is to destroy the family, then the family's always under attack. And so knowing that myself, it's a constant reminder when I say something about marriage to always try to be transparent about the woes of trying to have a functional marriage. It's funny because, and we're just talking, whoever's watching this and listening. For me and my relationship, one of the things that always comes up when we get into these rifts is that when we sit down and we actually reevaluate where this is all coming from, most of the time it's never me and my husband that have the issue. It's always an outside divider. It's how this person feels about this, or how this person feels about this, or how somebody did something and then how I responded or how he responded and how that made either one of us feel. But if you took us, which is probably impossible, and put us in a vacuum. So if you go, us without any of the outside effects, we get along perfectly fine. He's my best friend. It's the honest to goodness truth. But when you take in the things that have to happen to live, there's children, and you have to make time for one another, and then there's ministry and all those other things, you do get this pulling apart. And so one of the constant reminders for us, and it always comes up, and it probably comes up in a blow up before we go, okay, that kind of went too far. But it always comes up, we need more time together. And that whole idea that Paul talks about, where he says, there's some times where you have to come apart to do, and not come apart in meaning you're two separate people, you're not had, because you have to be a had to actually decide to go into prayer and fasting separately so that you can come back together stronger, or you can do a particular work for the Father. And so you see this idea that you have to be able to get time to do the work for the Father, but you also have to devote time to your mate or to your spouse. Now, people who are single, obviously we talked about that. So for us, it always comes to that where we both know that we have something that the Father has called us to do. And a lot of married couples forget that the spouse, and it's most of the time the wife, that she also has something that she has to be doing for Yah. And not everybody's thing is that they need to be a teacher. I'm a teacher by profession, so being a teacher for me is not like foreign to my husband. That's my secular profession. But it's not always that for everybody. Some people's thing might be, I need to homeschool my children. That is a call. And I will talk about that on a later date, but that is a call. And it's an important call for the family. Torah teaches us that we are supposed to educate our children. Now, how that works and how that looks, we'll talk about later. But this idea that both people decide to separate for prayer and fasting is not a one-sided thing. Like, oh yeah, the husband just doesn't think with the wife because he has to talk to Yah. And the wife just sits around and she waits, until the husband's fasting time is over. No, it's for both people, because both people have something that they need to be doing within their marriage, and also obviously outward toward the rest of the world. So I've heard people, I've literally heard this out of men's mouths, and I'll never use names, but I heard a man tell his wife, Yah doesn't tell you anything that he doesn't tell me. And while that is true in theory, if the husband is not in a position or receptive to the voice of Yah, then you're not going to hear what Yah is saying to you for your wife, especially if you don't feel like whatever Yah is speaking to you is for your wife. And so dealing with this whole idea of what you should know before you get married, staying on that particular topic, if you go to Numbers chapter 30, there there's actually, the whole chapter talks about it, but it talks about this idea of taking, okay, so Numbers chapter 30 deals with this whole idea of taking a vow. And it deals with the idea that both men and women will have a desire to serve Yah. And so it deals with a man, and because the man's head is Yah, so we're doing this order, then when the man takes a vow, he takes this vow directly up with him and Yah. Okay? But when you have the woman, because the woman also has a covering. If she has the covering, her covering is her father first, of course. And then if she doesn't have a father, then obviously her covering is Yah. But her father is her initial covering. And it says if the woman takes a vow, her father can override the vow. And then Yah says, okay, you know what, I see your heart's desire, but your father overrode your vow. And so this is what it's going to be. It's not going to be that. And then Yah forgives the person because their father has the authority. Okay? But if the father hears the daughter take the vow and he does not override that vow, then that vow stands, whatever it is. However she's saying that she's going to serve Yah, if it means that she's going to be single, if it means that she's going to stay a virgin forever, you know, then the father says, okay, the family is agreeing that this is something that is going to happen. And as a father, I say it's okay. Okay? The same thing then applies for the married woman. So the married woman also can take a vow. Obviously, her vow is not to celibacy, because you can't take a vow to celibacy once you're married. That doesn't work. So the vow obviously has to do with serving Yah in a particular capacity. And so when this woman takes this vow, the husband can either override it or he can affirm it. Now, what's very interesting is a married woman obviously has this going on for her. And when women think about getting married, they have to. And I'm telling you, yes, you have to. That's why you have to be careful about who you marry. You have to take into consideration that your husband becomes the final say on everything that you do. It's just the reality. Now, you don't have a person who can just say one thing one time and then take it back and then take it back. That's not how it works. The day you hear this person take a vow, obviously, then you have to make that statement. Or obviously, we say in the congregation, when people get married, you say, or forever hold your peace, right? It's kind of that kind of situation. You don't get to get upset and say, oh, well, now that you're taking this vow and it's doing X, Y, and Z and the family, you have to, at that time, pray and make a conscious assessment, because sometimes things get tough when Yah has called a person to do something, and you might want to say, you know what, never mind. And that's not how that works when you decide and devote yourself to doing something for Yah. So you have to be careful who you choose to yoke with if your call is to be married. And I mean, your call is to be married because you cannot be single. Some people think they can, but you can't. Some people can't. I shouldn't say, but you can. But some people can't. And so you have to be careful. So when you pick a spouse, one of the things that has to be determined is that you compliment that person in what their actual call is. Because a lot of people are called to do things and get married sometimes prematurely, and then the call comes out and the person realizes, I don't want to be with the person that operates in that particular call. A lot of people get married before Torah, or have been married before Torah, and you find that your husband's been called into a particular walk, and you're like, oh no, I don't want to do this. Well, that doesn't necessarily work that way. Talking about people who are in Torah, who know that their walk is going to be a certain thing, and then you find a person that complements that walk, and obviously the father helps with that. So you shouldn't just go out and pick a person. Okay, so moving along. So we're getting to this idea of singleness, and we've been kind of talking about it for a while. I'm in the car, so I probably talk a lot. And the whole idea is, before you get into a relationship, because there's no like dating in Torah. Like, you're not testing the product before you buy it, in the sense that like you're having sex with the person and now we're married, but then we'll really get married when I really want to marry you. So we'll have a ceremony after I decide if I want to marry you, but I'm going to try some more product on the side to figure out which one I really want to be with. That's not Torah. That's pimping. And that is fornication, and adultery all mixed together. And the reason why that is not permitted in Torah is because we are to be clean, not only in spirit, but in body. And a lot of you guys are carrying a lot of baggage from a lot of different partners because you're trying to find your mate through their lower gate. Okay, that's not how we do it. But the way you do it is, one, prayer, and one, a person that's in Torah. I don't know what this new thing is with the men in Torah, where they're like recruiting women who to Torah by marriage. Like, she's not really in Torah, but she's open to it, so I'll make her my second wife. I don't know about that at all. That's that's very interesting, because you're trying to convince somebody to be in a walk that they haven't already made up their mind to be in. And our example is always Yah. And the person first has to be obedient to wanting to keep Torah before they can be your wife. You don't wife them and then bring them into Torah by dominating them. That doesn't necessarily work. So when you're in a situation where you're single, you need to be very careful about who you yoke with, and to know whether or not your call is to be married. The husband is the head of the wife. And so before you get married, you have to be ready to submit to that. And I'm talking to women who are getting married to men who are in Torah. If you're not in Torah, you should get into it before you make any decisions about getting married. If you're new in Torah, you need to get into Torah and know Torah before you get married. It's a prerequisite. Yah gave the law and then said, okay, they heard the law and they said, okay, all that you said we will do. It's not this idea of getting into the marriage and then now I'm going to give you the law. Because sometimes people might decide that that's not what's cut out for them in a relationship, And so you need to know ahead of time. So people who are just getting into the truth, and you have these men or these women like surrounding these men and women, vice versa, trying to pressure them into marriage, and they don't know Torah, then you're putting them in a position to be deceived, because you have a person who knows more or who knows less, on either side, and a person can manipulate the scriptures in order to get you to do things throughout this walk that are not based in Torah. Get Torah in you, get the word in you, and then choose a person, because you want somebody who lines up with the person. For the women who've had a good father, they can surely attest to the fact that when they choose a spouse, they choose one that mirrors that of their father. And even women who had bad fathers, the sad thing is women choose a spouse that also mirrors that of their bad father. So in either case, the father in this situation is Yah. And you need to have the characteristics of the father in your heart, so that as you seek out a mate, and vice versa for males, as you seek out a mate, as the mate seeks you out, I guess, for the woman, and as for a woman, for a man, as you allow the father to provide a mate for you, you need to be looking for these things. Looks don't matter. You have to be attracted to the person you're married to. I'm not saying, please don't, you know what I mean. It's not about how a person looks. It's not about how the outer portion. Because you can take a person who looks good and you can begin to hate them because of their insides. And you can take a person who may not be 100% attractive based upon what you thought the world standard and attractiveness was, and you can make that person your mate, and they can be more faithful, and you'll love them, not learn to, but you'll love them more than you would have loved a person who was built and was cute with all that makeup and all that stuff on, and then she takes it off and she can't cook and she don't know how to wash clothes and she's disobedient and haughty, and all she cares about is her body, and all she cares about is wearing clothes so she can look good for other men. And vice versa, you can have a man where, oh yeah, he got a bad haircut and he always fit it. Oh yeah, and then you'll get that man, and then he don't want to pay bills because he wants to buy Jordans, and he always wants to look nice, which means he always wants the attention of other people. And it can cause a problem. Get a person who is modest in heart and in spirit for both sexes. Modesty doesn't go one way. Modesty goes both ways, okay? And so you look for the father in the person you're looking for. And that is how you choose a person. And so when you come into this truth, for a lot of women who are in this truth, they're like, oh, I want a man who's in Torah. Know that the man is in Torah because you know Torah. Have the same standard that you have for that person for yourself, and then vice versa. And wait for Yah. The first person that comes who's a moray or a teacher or anything and is on a hot pursuit after you, I would say wait, pray, fast. Because a lot of people, they're using marriage, especially in Torah, as a way to lawfully have sex with people. And then when they lawfully have sex with people, they're using Torah to lawfully put these people away. Or they're trying to use Torah to, quote unquote, lawfully add to themselves other people that they want to have sex with. Okay? And that's not what this is. that marriage is to not be entered into lightly, ever. Okay? So, for those of you who are married and who are trying to walk this walk, this idea of your husband being your head and being a leader and allowing that to happen is also based in Torah. You need to know Torah so that you know that this person is leading you correctly. Because there are a lot of people being led with the word, then it's not Torah. They're being led with a word or with a familiar spirit. So you need to know the word as you're being led. You don't take anybody's word. Let Yah be true and every man a liar. Period. That's how this works. I don't believe what anyone says on the surface if they can't substantiate it with scripture. And I'm not talking about scripture out of context. I mean scripture where their heart is in a place where Yah is actually speaking to them. And that has to be the case because if you haven't watched the video on Sons of Korah, it's very important that you probably do. Because the wives of the sons of Korah went straight down into the pit with their husbands. And these people were in the congregation of the righteous. They were in the called out congregation, okay? And when Moshe said, wives and children, step away from your husbands, and they didn't because destruction was getting ready to come, these people made a choice to their husbands when they were flat out wrong, okay? And so, wives, know Torah, so that as you're being led correctly, and you know when the voice of Yah is speaking, because Yah does still speak to the whole family in a whole. Okay, kind of got long. I didn't mean for it to get that long, but know that be able to understand that there are calls for different people, and marriage is a call, and singleness is a call, and you need to seek the Father before you make these decisions, because you know that it can get really bad if you don't know what the Father has for you, male and female. And yeah, so I just wanted to share that because like I said earlier, a lot of times we teach a lot of stuff, but there's part of being a Hebrew is the reality of being a Hebrew, and Yah always exposes the reality of the Hebrew walk, and He exposes the flaws in trying to gel together and become one. And so as a person who is just laying it out there, I'm not perfect. Like there are times when I'm like, oh my gosh, how did I get into this? And I'm sure my husband's probably the same way. But the thing that makes that 3-strand cord, right? Thing that binds it together when we're like, no, we're going this way, is Yah and Torah. But if you don't have a relationship that's based on Torah, where Torah is the final say, I'll add this. With Torah, the husband leads, and so caught up in what we want to do that we get headstrong as women, and it can happen. Same thing for the man, though. There are times when I've made previous plans, and this is kind of not a good analogy. So I talked about the transparency, and so I want you guys to know that there are times that come up where it can be rough, but those are the phases that we work through, and we use Torah to work through those particular phases to get on the other side. Because most of the time, the thing that's holding us back is pride and fear. Fear of what people are going to think if we submit to Yah and to our spouse, or just submit to Yah. You know, what are family going to think if you are unmarried and you're a virgin and Yah says, you know, or you're just unmarried or a widow and you say, you know, I'm not going to get married anymore. I'm going to take this time for those who have children to just focus on my children. And so until my children are grown and until, you know, I fulfill whatever Yah asked me to fulfill, I'm not going to be in a relationship. And you could be young and do this. And people go, well, you need a man and you need this and you need that, which is true in a sense. But if Yah is calling you as a widow or as an unmarried person to be single so that He can work out some things in you for that person, then Yah also will put in place people, especially in a Torah community, who are going to nurture and protect and care for your children. That's why people in a position of a more and a teacher in the masculine and in the male form, a more, I said it, are sent to cover those. And so that position shouldn't be abused. You have a lot of people who abuse that position. And then you have the more, like, okay, I'm going to marry and have kids with all the single women in the congregation. It's not the case. But a person should, you know, help their sister and brother. So if you do have a sister in the congregation who is single, we shouldn't be necessarily forcing her to get married. You know, if she's single and she came into the congregation and she has a child, nobody should be forcing her to get married. We should be teaching her Torah and if there are men in the congregation, she has a son, then they should be helping her raise that son, not expecting for her to sleep with them. Because Yah is trying to work out things in each and every one of us to make us the right person for somebody. And sometimes it takes a brother and sister to become a community to help with these things, because it's very interesting. People think that every time a person committed adultery or fornication in scripture that they were murdered. And that's not the case, because there's plenty of people who have babies who were not murdered. Yah didn't kill babies, first of all. So if a person came to the congregation, that person was pregnant, let's just say, it would make Yah a baby murderer. So it's just like abortion. So kill her and kill that baby, right? So you had an idea of compassion within the congregation, which meant that there would be some people around who had babies who didn't have babies by that actual person. They would be probably outside the congregation. It actually has a verse where it says if you have a bastard, and that bastard's outside the congregation, which means that you had a baby out of wedlock and you lived and that child lived, okay? And so it doesn't say now get that person and then force them to marry somebody. No, there's something that has to happen to that person's heart before anybody even wants to be with them. And so for these people just to grab all these single mothers and then try to make them wives, and they've been single and they have this independent spirit, and then now you're calling them whores and Jezebels, you're missing the picture. And the picture is, while you're in whatever state you're in, be content in that state, because Yah is working out something in you. Okay? Long way to get to that, but that's what it is. Whatever state you are in, if you're single, if you're in the beginning of your marriage, if you're divorced, if you're unmarried, if you're widowed, stay in that state long enough for Yah to work out anything that he's trying to work out in you, to prepare you for whatever else he has for you on the other side. So often people jump from one thing to the next, and they don't let Yah work out the emotional side of, what he's trying to do in you so that he can prepare you for his next work. And I'm speaking from personal and observational experience. Be content with where you are, because in that area is where Yah is going to grow you. Okay? So I hope that is something that speaks to you guys. I know it was kind of like not necessarily a lesson, and I don't feel like everything has to be a lesson. Sometimes you just need to talk, and we talk together and we share. If you have questions about this, because I know it wasn't like a lesson I was writing on a board, email me. So Hulda Dawid at herroyalroots.com. I'll put in the comments. You guys can email me. Give me time, like 48 hours to answer emails. I get a lot of emails, and so I try to answer them in order, and I try to take out time to answer them. I don't want to just write back and go, oh, thanks for writing me. That was pretty awesome. Have a nice day. I actually want to take out time, hear your question, pray about it, and then answer it with scripture and with insight. So give me time. Don't think I'm ignoring you, because I'm not like that. And remember, be content with where you are, but be willing to grow where you are. And that's all I have to say. Okay, shalom, shalom.
Royalty. Royalty.